When taking time out to visit new and captivating sites around the world, a must-see destination for any avid traveller is the City of London. Vibrant and exhilarating, with world-class restaurants, glamorous shopping districts and a nightlife that's positively buzzing with energy and excitement, the British capital offers everything you could possibly hope for in a city, and very much more besides. Amongst the glitz and glamour of the city lights, spectacular monuments make for dazzling views wherever you turn, and the breathtaking architecture from centuries gone by is a constant reminder that London was once the epicentre of a vast empire. This portrait of a city will reveal the rich and intriguing heritage of London as we delve into the past to explore some of its most famous attractions. As you'll soon find out, the stunning buildings that dominate the skyline hold many fascinating tales from the Norman conquest of 1066 right through to the monarchs of the present day. And whether you enjoy wandering through delightful parks and gardens, visiting the city's museums, or simply taking in the spectacular views by the end of this journey, you'll be left in no doubt as to why London really has become one of the greatest cities on the globe. London has been a major settlement for almost 2,000 years, ever since it was founded by the Romans in 43 AD. Over the centuries, many different monarchs and architects have made their mark on the city, leaving a wonderful array of buildings, ranging from Gothic cathedrals to the black and white edifices of the Elizabethan era. But we'll begin our exploration of London at one of the city's relatively recent architectural treasures, and possibly one of its most iconic attractions. Buckingham Palace has been the official residence of the British monarchy since the 19th century, and millions of people flock here every year to take in the regal surroundings and to catch a glimpse of the royal family. This is, in fact, one of the few working palaces left in the world today, and banquets, dinners and royal ceremonies are still regularly held here, although during the summer months the royal family escape to Scotland, leaving the staterooms open for the public to explore. The original building was constructed in 1703 as a townhouse for the Duke of Buckingham. The structure has changed a great deal since the 18th century. In 1820, King George IV commissioned John Nash, the most famous architect of the age, to transform Buckingham House into a great palace. After many costly renovations, 3 new wings were built around a central courtyard, creating a palace truly fit for a king or a queen for that matter. Nash's designs took so long to complete that it wasn't until 1837, when Queen Victoria came to the throne, that Buckingham Palace finally became home to the British royal family. And in the square outside the famous east front of the palace, the magnificent Victoria Memorial provides a fitting commemoration to the Queen who once lived here. While the surrounding area bustles with traffic, it's difficult to imagine that the palace was once surrounded by rolling green countryside. But if you head northeast from the Victoria Memorial through St James's Park, you'll be given a little light relief from the clamour of the city and get a sense of what the area was like many centuries ago. These ornamental gardens were originally marshy water meadows until King Charles II redesigned the area. From the carefully tended flower beds and tree-lined avenues to the romantic lakeside, the park provides a pleasant retreat right in the very heart of the city. But with so much more to see, it's best not to pause here for too long. If you take a short walk to the southwest of the park, you'll find another building, which plays a very significant role in the history of the British monarchy. Every stone and statue of Westminster Abbey is steeped in tales of the past, and its origins date right back to the 10th century, when Benedictine monks first came to the site. In around 1050, one of the last Anglo-Saxon kings of England, Edward the Confessor, built a stone abbey here, which was to stand next to a royal palace he'd constructed on the River Thames. Although King Edward's Abbey didn't survive the test of time, the magnificent medieval building that you can see today was constructed by King Henry III in the 13th century as a shrine to honour the earlier Saxon king. King Henry's choice of Anglo-French Gothic style has now made this one of the most important Gothic buildings in the country, and the spectacular structure has been the setting for royal coronations for almost 1,000 years. Within, you can find the tombs of many legendary royals, including the Tudor queens Mary I and her half-sister Elizabeth I. Poets' Corner, meanwhile, is a wonderfully sacred area where Britain's greatest writers are commemorated, from William Shakespeare to Charles Dickens. If you venture to the east of the Abbey, you'll also find that although Edward the Confessor's adjoining royal residence didn't survive the test of time, a magnificent palace still stands on this site, and the kings of England chose this location as their official residence right up until the 16th century. Today, Westminster Palace plays a very significant role in Great Britain as the seat of the British government. Indeed, politicians have gathered here since 1295, when the first official Parliament of England met. The palace is now also known as the Houses of Parliament. There can be no doubt that many great historical events have taken place here, which have played an important part in shaping the British nation. Westminster Palace is certainly a breathtaking sight. And although few vestiges of the original medieval structure remain, the mock Gothic architecture, designed by Sir Charles Barry in Victorian times, has created a truly impressive building. If you're keen to seek out the remnants of the ancient palace, however, you'll find the crypt of St. Stephen's Chapel has survived the fires of centuries gone by, and the Jewel Tower, which was built to house the jewels of King Edward III in the 14th century, is fascinating to explore. Of course, any visitor to the Houses of Parliament will also be keen to see one of the world's most famous clock towers, which stands on the northern end of the building. This is unrivalled as the largest clock in Britain, and the deep chimes of the giant bell housed within, affectionately known as Big Ben, after the Chief Commissioner of Works at the time of its construction, has become a symbol of Britain across the globe. As we take in our last views of Westminster, it's now time to move north and really step back in time as we visit an edifice constructed by the Normans after their invasion of England in 1066. The Tower of London is one of the most evocative and fascinating of all London's landmarks. It began its days as an impressive fortress to protect the city from further invasion, and indeed to protect the Normans from the native English. William the Conqueror ordered its construction in 1078 to symbolise his power, and it certainly became an imposing structure along the river, warning the English that the Normans were here to stay. As years went by, the ever-expanding tower was used as a royal palace, and if you have time to explore inside, you'll find a fascinating array of rooms and such well-known treasures as the crown jewels. In the 16th century, however, during the reign of Henry VIII, the Tower of London was to become a sinister prison, synonymous with terror torture and death. 2 of the king's wives were beheaded here, and many of the 50,000 people he condemned to death during his reign were sent from the tower to be executed outside, creating a ghoulish spectacle for onlookers. You can still see the chilling Traitor's Gate, where prisoners entered the tower from the river, but you'll find that nowadays people are more likely to use the nearby bridge to reach the Tower of London. Tower Bridge was built at the end of the 19th century, and although it doesn't have the rich history of its impressive neighbour, it has nevertheless become another iconic symbol of the British capital. If you have a good head for heights, the catwalk joining the 2 towers is open to the public, and the beautiful views down the Thames are truly spectacular. But to get an even better view of the city, you'll find that London can easily accommodate your needs. To the south of Tower Bridge, you'll find the London Eye, which at 135 metres is one of the world's tallest observation wheels. This really is a miracle of modern engineering, even by 21st century standards, and the views afforded by these spacious capsules are quite literally breathtaking, and whatever the weather, the experience is always rewarding. It's now time to discover a little of what London's museums and galleries have to offer. You'll find an abundance of fabulous cultural institutions scattered throughout the capital. From the vast collections at the British Museum in Bloomsbury to the delightful Sherlock Holmes Museum on Baker Street, there are plenty of fascinating sites where you can dip into various aspects of British heritage. Many cultural treasures have been gathered in the capital over the centuries, and in the next step of our journey we'll head to South Kensington, where we can delve into some of the most impressive museums London has to offer. Kensington is without doubt one of London's most expensive and affluent areas. It's easy to understand why Queen Victoria's consort, Prince Albert, chose this district to create a new museum complex for the city in the 19th century. Albert took an active interest in the arts, science, trade and industry, and used the profits from the Great Exhibition of 1851 to help establish a fabulous array of cultural and educational institutions here. One of the most popular museums to be found in South Kensington today is the Natural History Museum. This vast cathedral-like building is in itself an architectural masterpiece, and the reliefs, sculptures and statues that decorate the exterior reveal many of the living and extinct species that can be found within. The museum is also a world-renowned centre for research, boasting a staggering 70 million specimens within its 5 main collections, and there are many incredible exhibits for the public to enjoy, revealing displays from prehistory right through to modern-day life on Earth. When you've experienced the splendours of nature, the achievements of the human race await in the Science Museum next door, and from medicine to space travel, children and adults alike will find plenty to entertain them here. Finally, a visit to the Victoria and Albert Museum just across the road will not disappoint. This was founded in 1852 as the Museum of Manufactures to inspire the design students of the day. It is now the world's largest museum of decorative arts. It houses a permanent collection of over 4.5 million objects spanning over 5,000 years of art, and its rooms and corridors are filled with ancient treasures, artwork and statues, and a breathtaking collection of artifacts. The name of the museum was actually changed by Queen Victoria in memory of her beloved husband, who suddenly died of typhoid in 1861 at the age of 42. And as we leave the complex he created so many years ago and venture into Kensington Gardens, you'll realise how very much the Queen was affected by the loss of her prince consort. At the top of Exhibition Road, you'll find it hard to miss the extraordinary gold-gilded Royal Albert Memorial towering above the trees. And if scale and grandeur indicate the depth of Victoria's sense of loss, then it'll come as no surprise that she never fully recovered from her husband's death. Completed in 1876, this medieval-looking shrine boasts a Gothic revival spire adorned with angels, while beneath a gilded bronze statue of the prince sits contemplating his surroundings. Meanwhile, elegant marble sculptures representing the 4 continents stand on the platform below. Prince Albert is not the only member of British royalty to be celebrated in Kensington Gardens, and if you head deeper into the park towards the Serpentine River, you'll find a site of more recent royal mourning. The Princess of Wales Memorial Fountain is a touching tribute to Princess Diana, who died in 1997, and the flowing water with calm pools, combined with the wonderful views across the river, create a truly extraordinary atmosphere. Designed to reflect the princess's life and her fondly remembered qualities, the fountain is a place where visitors can remember Diana and enjoy a little peace and tranquility far from the hustle and bustle of London's busy streets. To the west of the memorial, you can find another location which is relevant to Diana's life. The princess occupied apartments in the west wing of Kensington Palace for 16 years, and this stately house has indeed been the residence of many famous royals such as Queen Victoria, who was born and raised here. Kensington Gardens were, in days gone by, the palace grounds, and today you can still see many charming features, such as the Italian garden at the head of the Serpentine, which serve as a reminder of its regal past. But now it's time to leave the pleasant surroundings of London's parkland and head back into the bustling city centre, where we'll find another of the British capital's most iconic buildings. The small area within Greater London, known as the City, is the historic core of London, where the original Roman settlement of Londinium was built. Today, the Square Mile, as it's also known, has become a major business and financial centre, and the area is dominated by banks and stylish modern office blocks. But although there are sadly few remnants of ancient architecture here, you'll find that one building in particular still provides a real reminder of the past. The magnificent St. Paul's Cathedral was restored to glory by the architect Sir Christopher Wren after the Great Fire of London, which destroyed 80% of the city in 1666. There has, in fact, been a church on this site since 604 AD, but the present building is considered to be the 4th St. Paul's Cathedral and is undoubtedly the most spectacular of all. When Wren was commissioned to rebuild St. Paul's, he came up with a daring new design that met considerable resistance from the conservative church authorities, who insisted the plan was simplified. However, the architect was a determined character, and although the final design wasn't quite as grand as Wren had hoped, the cathedral he created has certainly made its mark on the city. The last stone was placed high up on the lantern on Wren's 76th birthday in 1708, and ever since its completion, St. Paul's has become synonymous with the resilience of the British capital, which has survived the ravages of war and fire over hundreds of years. From St. Paul's, we couldn't be in a better position to see an area of the city where modern design and ancient architecture sit so comfortably side by side. Across the river is the Tate Modern, where since the year 2000, the National Collection of Modern Art, dating from the 20th century onwards, has been housed. This once fully operational power station was designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, the architect best known for creating Great Britain's iconic red telephone boxes. But as it became surplus to requirements in the 1980s, the building was eventually renovated and now houses Britain's largest collection of modern art. Often controversial and always thought-provoking, the exhibits in the Tate Modern are guaranteed to be a talking point, as is the building in which they are housed. Next door to the Tate, you can find a new addition to the buildings gracing the river, inspired by one of the oldest and most famous of London's entertainment emporiums, the William Shakespeare Globe Theatre. First erected in 1599, the original Globe Theatre was built by Shakespeare and his acting troupe, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and provided the stage for many of the famous dramatist's greatest plays. Today, you can relive the experience of the Elizabethan era within its walls, but if you prefer something a little more modern, you'll need to head for London's West End. At night, London comes alive to reveal a whole new side to its persona, and for theatregoers, the choice on offer is without rival. From Shaftesbury Avenue to Piccadilly, there are a whole host of theatres and shows on offer with everything available, from musical extravaganza to serious drama. If, of course, you prefer a less expensive form of entertainment, you can always visit Covent Garden, where you can often see performances in the central market area that are often as captivating as those on the stage. Whatever show you choose, what better way could there be to end the evening than a meal in one of the city's many restaurants, where you'll find that London's richly deserved reputation for food is as good as anywhere in the world. From quiet cafes and busy restaurants to the unique area known as Chinatown and the lively atmosphere of Leicester Square, there's always somewhere to enjoy fine food, whether a quiet dinner for two or a night out with a group of friends. Sadly, our tour of London's best-loved landmarks is now drawing to a close. It's time to explore our final destination. You'll find that whether it's night or day, Trafalgar Square is the perfect place to soak up the atmosphere of the British capital. The square commemorates the Battle of Trafalgar, when Napoleon and the French were beaten at sea by Lord Nelson, who was killed aboard his flagship, the Victory. You'll find it hard to miss the statue of the famous Vice Admiral overlooking the square on top of his 165-foot high column. And since its construction, the monument has become one of the city's most treasured structures. At the base, you'll find 4 magnificent lion statues standing guard, which were created by Queen Victoria's favourite artist, Edward Landseer. And here, taking in our last views of Trafalgar Square, we really do reach the end of our journey. As I'm sure you'll agree, the pleasures of London and the amazing sights make this a truly magnificent capital city. There is something here to enlighten and entertain everyone. From palaces and parks to museums and modern landmarks, there are so many unique treasures just waiting to be discovered. London has evolved, surviving to rise phoenix-like from the ashes on so many occasions. If you take the time to explore its most intriguing haunts, you'll realise why this is one city that really does deserve the title Great. When seeking out new and intriguing places to visit, the enchanting city of Madrid is often overshadowed by more popular holiday destinations around Europe, such as Paris and Rome. But take the time to explore the bustling streets and squares of this remarkable city, and you'll soon discover that Spain boasts a capital with as much culture, beauty and history as any other on the continent. Shaped over centuries by long-forgotten empires, there are a multitude of tales just waiting to be told in the fabric of its streets and buildings. From magnificent palaces, fountains and cathedrals, to museums of world renown and the towering edifices of a more modern era, there's certainly no lack of sights to inspire and delight the city traveller. In this portrait of Madrid, you'll have the chance to delve deep into Spain's rich and turbulent past, for, as you'll soon discover, this city has had its fair share of conflict. For those who prefer to enjoy the beauty of the capital without dwelling too much on history, however, you'll find that the delightful Mediterranean climate provides plenty of enchanting spaces where you can simply soak up the atmosphere of Madrid. There'll also be plenty of time to enjoy the glitz and glamour of the city nightlife with an array of cinemas, theatres and designer shops to choose from as we explore the more contemporary areas of the capital. As daylight breaks, our tour of Madrid will begin far from the clamour of clubs and city traffic as we explore an area which is considered to be the very heart of the old city, Plaza de la Villa. During medieval times, this was a bustling market square, and although nowadays the atmosphere is much calmer than centuries ago, the buildings that overlook the plaza still have plenty of stories to tell. One of the oldest structures in the square, and indeed in the entire city, is the Torre de los Lujanes, which was built in the early 15th century and named after the Lujan family, who resided here for over 200 years. As well as once having a reputation for being the tallest building in Madrid, the architecture of the tower is in the Mudéjar style and serves as a reminder of the city's early Arabic roots. Madrid was first founded as a Muslim fortress back in the 9th century, and although the Muslims were eventually driven out of Spain as Christianity swept across the Iberian Peninsula and the Spanish monarchs became more powerful, traces of Islamic influence on the culture of the nation still remain. If we take a look at the later constructions in Plaza de la Villa, you'll find that the style is quite different from the Torre de los Lujanes, however. The city's first town hall is a fine example of 17th century architecture, with its steeple-like towers and dormer windows, and later touches to the exterior include the wonderful Baroque doorways and the romantic balconies, added so that the royal family could stand and watch processions passing through the plaza many centuries ago. Another prominent building in the square is Casa de Cisneros, which was built in 1537 by the nephew of the famed Cardinal Cisneros, who was one of the most powerful men in Spain in the late 15th and early 16th century. Cisneros served twice as regent and introduced many harsh religious reforms to the country, earning him the reputation of a tyrant amongst the Muslim population. Some in fact believe he may have been poisoned by his enemies when he died in 1517. But although he didn't live long enough to see his nephew's grand building, he would most certainly have approved of this fine example of early Renaissance architecture. In front of Casa de Cisneros stands another prominent figure in the history of Spain, Álvaro de Bazan. The statue of this great Spanish admiral was brought to the square in 1980, although the subject predates this time by many centuries. Bazan was the man responsible for drawing up the plans for the Armada, which was set to invade England back in the 16th century. At this time, Spain was one of the world's greatest empires, controlling territory which stretched from the Americas to the islands of Southeast Asia. But the Spanish king, Philip II, was also eager to include Great Britain in the nations he reigned over. Bazan, like his king, became an advocate of war. Alas, his plans for the Great Spanish Armada would amount to nothing when the ships of Elizabeth I destroyed the fleet before it reached British shores. Álvaro de Bazan is nonetheless considered a national hero, remembered in this wonderfully detailed sculpture dominating the plaza. Although Spain failed to conquer Great Britain in the 16th century, the country remained an important world power as money poured in from the New World, fueling an artistic boom. King Philip II, and indeed many of the Habsburg kings, were great patrons of art, and this era became an age of cultural brilliance described as the Spanish Golden Age. Some of Spain's greatest artists and writers, such as the great Baroque painter Diego Velázquez and Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, found their place in the history of Madrid during this time, and their statues in other areas of the city reveal how very important they've become as part of Spanish heritage. A square which would have been very popular indeed during the Spanish Golden Age, and which is considered to be the epitome of Habsburg Madrid, stands just 200 metres east of the Plaza de la Villa, and is probably one of the most famous squares in the city. Plaza Mayor was built during the reign of King Philip III, who sits proudly astride his horse in the centre of the square, overseeing the commuters hurrying by. The statue was designed in 1616 by two famous Italian artists, Giovanni di Bologna and his apprentice Pietro Tacca, and was moved here in the 19th century to complete the design of the plaza. The lampposts that surround the statue depict life in the square in days gone by, and you'll spot such scenes as bullfights, a masquerade ball, and one of the darker aspects in the history of Madrid, interrogations by the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was established in 1478 to root out, suppress and punish heretics, and ensured that the Catholic faith dominated Spanish culture for many centuries. Plaza Mayor, in fact, became a popular place for public trials by the Inquisition, and if found guilty, the victims would face torture or execution. Fortunately, the Spanish Inquisition was dissolved by the 18th century, and today you'll find the gorier aspects of Plaza Mayor's past are long forgotten. There are plenty of lovely sights to take in here, and the square is surrounded by wonderful historical buildings. One of the most impressive of these must be the Casa de la Panaderia, which has a facade adorned with beautiful figurative paintings. From the architectural treasures overlooking the square, to the array of wonderful little bars and cafes that surround it, this has become one of the most pleasant areas in the city. But now it's time to move on to a different part of Madrid, and a short walk to the west will take us to one of the city's most prized possessions. When, in 1561, King Philip II decided that the imperial court should be based in Madrid, there was one building, essential for any capital city, which was missing: a cathedral. Designs were hurriedly drawn up so construction could begin. It wasn't until over 400 years later that the Catedral de Almudena, with its impressive neo-Gothic grey and white facade, was completed. Political problems, war and turbulence delayed construction, which didn't even begin until the 19th century. But finally, the cathedral dedicated to the patron saint of Madrid, the Virgin Almudena, was inaugurated by the Pope in 1993. And as you can see, the result has certainly been worth waiting for. There is, however, fierce competition from another of the city's most spectacular buildings, which stands across the square from the cathedral and reveals the influence of the French on the Spanish capital. The Palacio Real was built by the first Bourbon king of Spain, Philippe V, who hailed from France and modelled Madrid's royal palace on the Great Palace of Versailles, which stands outside Paris. The new king ordered the construction of the Palacio Real after an earlier version was destroyed by fire on Christmas Eve in 1734, and was adamant that his palace should be the greatest in the entire world. It was eventually completed in 1755, and even to this day it remains the largest palace in Western Europe. The line of Bourbon kings has survived into the 21st century. Palacio Real remains the official residence of Spain's royal family, although they are rarely at home, preferring a smaller place on the outskirts of Madrid when not attending state occasions. This leaves members of the public at liberty to explore a great many of the palace's 3,000 rooms and experience the pure opulence once enjoyed by Spanish royalty. On the east side of the palace, you'll find another of Madrid's many stunning plazas, the Plaza de Oriente, which was once an area where crowds could gather to see kings, queens or dictators making their public appearances from the palace balcony. Complete with an elegant semicircular design, glorious trees and impressive statues of Spanish royalty, today this is an enchanting space where you can wander amongst the hedgerows and soak up the atmosphere of days gone by. You can also find a later addition to the area here, which was built during the reign of Queen Isabel II in the 19th century. The Teatro Real is considered one of the finest stages in the world for opera, and visiting is a must for music lovers. If you prefer to stay outside in the sun, however, you'll find that on the streets of Madrid, entertainment is never far away. The Palacio and Teatro Real have given us a taste of what the Bourbon kings and queens brought to Madrid. But you'll soon find that constructing royal palaces, theatres and gardens was just a small part of their contribution to the city. Under the reign of Carlos III in the 18th century, the capital began to take on a much grander appearance as Madrid was expanded and embellished, and many of the elaborate fountains, promenades and impressive monuments you can find all around the city today are the result of his new vision for the capital. One of the city's most famous landmarks, the Plaza de Cibeles, was constructed during the reign of King Carlos, and just as the Colosseum is synonymous with Rome and the Eiffel Tower with Paris, this busy junction now epitomises Madrid. The square takes its name from the beautiful fountain that stands at its centre, which is a wonderful depiction of the Greco-Roman goddess of nature, Cybele, being pulled in her chariot by two enormous lions. Surrounding the fountain and all around the plaza, you'll find many impressive landmarks built in a much later era. One which cannot fail to draw the eye is the Palacio de Comunicaciones. The locals humorously refer to this building as Our Lady of Communications, because, despite illusions of grandeur and all the style of a magnificent church, it was Madrid's post office for many years, although it's since become home to the city council. This architectural masterpiece was completed in 1909 and designed by Antonio Palacios, who's been responsible for many other beautiful structures across the city. Opposite the Palacio de Comunicaciones, on the other side of the square, you'll find a slightly earlier building by Palacios, which dates back to 1918. While the architect created a palace to house the city post office, this beautiful structure is home to none other than the city bank, Banco de España. The Plaza de Cibeles and the buildings that surround it are only a small part of the designs that Carlos III had for the grander Madrid, however. And if you turn south, you'll find a beautiful boulevard adorned with elegant lampposts, flower beds and fountains called the Paseo del Prado, which has become a favourite haunt for visitors to the city. This lovely tree-lined walkway was once an idyllic district of market gardens known as the Meadow. It is today one of the most sophisticated streets in Madrid, which explains why it's so popular with locals and tourists alike. Initially, the walkway was to be surrounded by buildings dedicated to the study of science. But eventually the study of art would have the greater influence on the Paseo del Prado. In fact, amongst the cultural locations that can be found all along the boulevard, 3 art museums make up what has since become regarded as the Golden Triangle of art. The most famous of these is, without doubt, the Prado Museum, which is renowned for housing the greatest collection of European art from the 12th century right through to the 19th century. And when you come face to face with the impressive facade, you'll immediately appreciate just how special this place is. Because the Prado has such a huge collection of art, the museum has had to constantly grow to accommodate all the treasures, and they're still in the process of building new wings today. Along with all the new rooms, there are also new entrances, the most famous and impressive of which is the Velázquez entrance, where you'll find a beautiful sculpture of the great Spanish painter himself. If you have time to brave the queues, once inside you'll find some of the most stunning examples of Spanish art, including paintings by Goya and Velázquez, and a great deal more besides. To the south of the Prado Museum, you'll find a more modern collection of artwork at the Centro de Arte Reina Sofia. This has been created in Madrid's former General Hospital, which was originally built in the late 18th century and is named after Queen Sofia, who inaugurated the museum in 1990. From famous work by Picasso, most notably Guernica, to surrealist masterpieces by Miro, the Sofia Gallery really is quite remarkable, and even those who are not fans of modern art can still appreciate the importance of this very special museum. The last of the 3 art museums that form the Golden Triangle is the Museo Thyssen-Bornemisza, which is the most recent addition to the trio. This houses paintings illustrating the history of Western art and has become a much treasured addition to the area. Other than art museums, you'll also find plenty of other interesting sites along the Paseo del Prado, including the Botanical Gardens, a naval museum, and Madrid Stock Exchange. While the Paseo del Prado became the pride and joy of Carlos III's reign, during the 19th century, a more modern city would begin to take shape as Madrid's burgeoning middle classes began to push the city's limits outwards. A new thoroughfare was created, which has since become a symbol of the more contemporary Madrid, and today Gran Via, which leads out of Plaza de Cibeles, is not only famous for its lively atmosphere, cinemas and theatres, but also for the fine examples of 20th century Spanish architecture. The street is filled with lavish buildings, which demonstrate all manner of interesting and arresting designs. And if you happen to be exploring by night, you'll find that one structure in particular draws the eye more than any other. The unmistakable Telefonica building owes much to the early classic skyscrapers of New York, and was, in fact, designed by the American architect Louis S. Weeks, although officially the credit for chief architect had to be given to the Spaniard Ignacio de Cardenas in order for planning permission to be secured. After dark, the city below buzzes with energy as the Spanish take time out to enjoy the evening attractions along Gran Via, and as shopping districts go, this wide, luxurious avenue is as fabulous as anything you would find in Paris or New York. Nearby, you'll also find another of the city's most famous landmarks, Puerta del Sol, the gateway to the sun, which marks the site of the original eastern entrance to Madrid and is today watched over by an equestrian statue of the king who made such an impact on the city, Carlos III. Having experienced the energy and fast-paced excitement of Madrid's nightlife, a little peace and tranquility will be no bad thing. And one of the last areas we'll explore on our tour through the city is the perfect place to relax and recharge your batteries. The Buen Retiro Park is a tranquil haven, which lies to the west of the Paseo del Prado, and one of 18 grand entrances that provide visitors with access to the park is the Independence Gate, with its fine columns and imposing ironwork. Visitors who enter the park for the first time are probably best advised to consult a map, as this inner city oasis covers a staggering 350 acres. To start our tour of the park, we'll begin in one of its more peaceful spots, the Palacio del Cristal, which has been gracing this space since 1887. Inspired by the Crystal Palace in London, which sadly didn't manage to stand the test of time after burning down in 1936, Madrid's gloriously intact version has views over a picturesque lake surrounded by trees, and is a great introduction to the park. If you have time, you can explore the many paths and trails that lead off into this wonderful green space, or simply sit back and take in the views. The building itself, despite being well over 100 years old, sparkles like new. And with its shimmering glass panels and beautifully arched roof, this is one of Madrid's brightest treasures and well worth seeking out. The Retiro Park is without doubt one of the world's most graceful and well-managed inner-city parks, and situated towards the southeastern end is the Rosaleda or Rose Garden. This beautifully designed garden with water features, sculpted hedges and arches has been here since 1915, and within you'll find well over 4,000 roses, representing in excess of 1,000 different varieties. Sadly, our time exploring not only this intriguing park, but also the city of Madrid is now drawing to a close. But we couldn't possibly leave without visiting the park's most memorable attraction. The Alfonso Monument, overlooking the park's wonderful boating lake, is truly magnificent and was constructed early in the 20th century. Alfonso, proudly astride his horse at the very top of the monument, looks over the proceedings, and complete with a semicircular colonnade below, this really is one of Madrid's most beautiful and more tranquil locations. And if there's time, hiring a boat and taking to the water is the perfect way to soak up the sun and take in this last stunning view of the city. Madrid will, as time goes by, become ever more popular, as there is just so much to see and do here, and hopefully, as we really have reached our journey's end, you'll be inspired to visit the city in person and experience the delights of the Spanish capital for yourself. Whether you're looking for enlightening museums, fabulous architecture, designer shops, or simply beautiful public parks in which to while away the hours, Madrid can offer all of these treasures and a great deal more besides. Russia has an atmosphere unlike any other place around the world. Strangely, so much of it remains unknown to the city tourist. When you've seen some of the spectacular attractions that could be found in its huge sprawling capital, however, you'll realise why Moscow is a city that just demands to be visited, and has recently become one of the most sought-out destinations on the tourist trail. With its glorious combination of ornate churches, monumental sculptures and the towering edifices of the communist era, this really has become a spectacular city of contrasts which cannot fail to capture the hearts of all those who venture through its bustling streets. As we explore a magnificent array of architectural wonders, in this portrait of a city, we'll embark upon an intriguing journey into Moscow's past, from its medieval beginnings to the turmoil of the 20th century. And along the way, we'll find out how this extraordinary capital city has evolved and flourished to become a favourite holiday destination. The first reference to Moscow dates back to the 12th century, when the city's founder, Prince Yuri Dolgoruki, built a wooden fortress on the banks of the river Moskva to surround the growing settlement. Almost 900 years later, a vast fortress, or in Russian, Kremlin, still stands near the site of the prince's original wooden structure. And here at the Kremlin, in the very heart of the city, we'll begin our tour of Moscow. This site has always been the citadel of Russia's past Tsars, and now Russia's current president also resides within these walls, which makes it easy to see why the Kremlin has shaped so much of Moscow's past and present landscape. Over the years, there have been many improvements to the protective Kremlin, but it was during the reign of Ivan III when the most elaborate developments took place. The Grand Prince of Moscow invited architects from Renaissance Italy to construct a palace and great cathedrals within the fortress, and in 1485 work began on new walls and towers for the complex. Although originally meant to protect the wonderful buildings inside the Kremlin, The imposing red wall created in the Middle Ages would become symbolic of the control and secrecy that surrounded the workings of Moscow in the 20th century. As you walk around the outside, you can't help but get a slight chill as the red brick wall towers above you. It wasn't until 1991, with the fall of the so-called Iron Curtain, that the public were allowed to venture inside. Thankfully, today, the doors to many of the buildings of the spectacular complex are open for public viewing. One of the main entrances that tourists take to get into the Kremlin is the Trinity Tower, and of all the entrance gates, at over 249 feet tall, this is the most impressive. Once you walk through its huge arch, there's a whole host of delights ready to be explored within the fortress's walls. From the magnificent Kremlin Palace to an array of golden-domed cathedrals and splendid churches. There's also plenty to see outside the looming walls of the Kremlin, however, and should you explore the eastern side of the complex, you'll find another of Moscow's most iconic attractions. When Ivan III had completed his work on the Kremlin, he decreed that no structures should be built within the immediate vicinity of the citadel, and an area once filled with houses was cleared to create a huge state square. The Red Square is now regarded as the centre of the city, and has become an important centre for parades, concerts, and other public events. Years ago, it was also an important trade centre, filled with shops and stalls, and at times there were even executions here. At the southeastern end of the square, you'll also find the very platform used by so many of Russia's past leaders to make their historical speeches, the Lobno Mesto. This small, circular stone platform is also the perfect spot to take in the majesty of Red Square, and from here you can really begin to explore the many wonderful buildings that surround the area. Every one of these beautiful buildings has a different story to tell. However, none is more beautiful than St. Basil's Cathedral. Russia's Tsar Ivan IV, otherwise known as Ivan the Terrible, ordered its construction in 1555 to commemorate his victory over the Mongol Tartars. Legend has it that the Tsar was so pleased with the building when it was completed that he had the architect Postnik Yakovlev blinded to prevent him from ever designing anything to equal its magnificence. Ivan may have gone a little too far to ensure that nothing quite like it was ever built again, but he was not wrong in recognising how truly remarkable this religious structure is. With its brightly coloured towers and onion domes, St. Basil's Cathedral is possibly the finest example of Russian Baroque architecture in Moscow, and standing pride of place overlooking the Red Square sums up the individual character of this intriguing city. There are still, however, plenty of attractions to see here, and you only have to turn around and look across to the other end of the square, and you'll see yet another world-class building just itching to be explored. This huge red structure, which towers over the bustling tourists, is the State Historical Museum. Originally opened in 1894, the museum's neo-Russian design is one of the city's finest examples of this kind of architecture. Even today, the red brick facade with its ornate turrets, pinnacles and decorative cornices leaves a lingering imprint on the mind. Thanks to the effort of Russian scientists, historians and archaeologists, the museum's collection of artifacts is so huge that the numbers have now reached well over 4 million. Inside, you can explore all aspects of Russian history, from its ancient tribal beginnings right up to the present day. And there are some fascinating treasures to see, such as the silver death mask of Peter the Great, who transformed the Russian Tsardom into an empire in the 18th century. If you enjoy delving into Russian history, there's one final building in the square which is probably the most intriguing of all. Behind the red brick walls of this rather plain structure lie the remains of one of the former Soviet Union's most famous leaders, Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was a revolutionary and a communist politician and the main leader of the October Revolution that marked the end of the old Tsarist Empire, bringing about the birth of the first communist state and the Soviet Union. After he died on January the 21st, 1924, many Russians urged the government to preserve his body. Despite his wish not to have any memorial, his remains were preserved and placed inside this building. The system of embalming perfectly preserved his body, and now he lies in his mausoleum on constant display in what looks like a state of never-ending sleep. Behind the mausoleum, you'll also find the graves of other famous communists, such as Yuri Andropov and Joseph Stalin, whose bodies now lie beneath the towering walls of the Kremlin. Incredibly, this is still only the beginning of a remarkable journey through Moscow's past, and the next few places to visit grace the skyline with some very splendid and perhaps more modern buildings than the ones you've seen so far. In fact, these are not just a few places to explore, but 7 superb sites which are spread out around southwest Moscow. This collection of buildings goes by the name of the Seven Sisters, and when you see them up close, you'll quickly understand why people think they're related. All these buildings were created after the Second World War, and were the brainchild of the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. He had great plans for what he called a palace of Soviets, and the Seven Sisters were just the start of his redesign of Moscow, which would include the phenomenal metro system and a soaring tower topped by a 328-foot statue of Lenin. The tower with Lenin was never completed, however the Seven Sisters were, and are now the signature buildings of what is known as the Stalinist Gothic style. One of the finest examples of this collection is the Moscow State University, situated just north of the Kremlin, which is actually the tallest educational building in the world. With its Soviet star perched on top and classic wedding cake-style towers, there's no mistaking that this is one of Stalin's buildings. The Moscow State University wouldn't look out of place in any modern metropolitan city, and this is exactly what Stalin wanted, as after the war he feared foreigners would come to Moscow and be astonished by the lack of skyscrapers. With the creation of this building and 6 others, Stalin wanted to show the world the power and influence the Soviet Union now had. Another fine example of one of Stalin's 7 sisters is the Foreign Ministry, which you'll discover if you walk to the western end of the city centre. The building looms high above the streets of the old Arbat district, and just like its siblings, demonstrates beautifully Stalin's vision for the new Soviet Union. The Foreign Ministry was one of the last buildings that Stalin overlooked before his death, and although his Palace of Soviets was never fully completed, what does remain makes up part of a stunning legacy. Stalin was also responsible for Moscow's metro system, which is one of the world's most famous underground networks. Since opening in 1935, it has always been at the forefront of design and usability. And to reach the next stop in our tour of Moscow, we'll need to venture a little further afield on the famous metro as we explore some more of the city's most impressive architectural treasures. We've already seen many of Moscow's most iconic attractions, but one of the most beautiful and most popular places to see if you come to the Russian capital is the Novodevichy Convent. Originally founded in 1524 by Basil III, this lovely building was built to commemorate the capture of the western Russian city of Smolensk from the Lithuanians. Understandably, many people now regard this as one of the most beautifully fortified religious institutions in all of Moscow. And with its ornately decorated walls and glorious towers, it creates a truly spectacular commemoratory building. Although the Communist Soviet Union closed the convent down in the 1920s, 2 decades later it was returned to its rightful owners, and today, hidden within, you can still find a fully working convent. It would have been quite a tragedy if the convent had been allowed to fall into disrepair, as gazing up at the tall towers and golden domes reaching high above the trees, it creates a stunningly captivating sight. You could probably be quite content just relaxing in the presence of this tranquil complex for the rest of the programme, as it's a place where all worldly stresses seem to just melt away. But as with many more places to visit, it's time to jump back onto the metro and head back into the city. Just a quick trip will take you back to the Old Arbat district, which is a charming area in the west of Moscow. It has a totally different atmosphere to the Novodevichi convent, yet you'll find it just as inviting. Very much like Covent Garden in London or Montmartre in Paris, the Old Arbat is an area alive with bustling shoppers, stalls and street artists. And just as in similar areas around the world, this was where the writers, poets, artists and intellectuals of the city once lived and worked. If you have time, you may like to delve a little deeper into the fascinating history of this area. And as many of the houses here once belonged to some of the most cultured residents in Moscow, you'll find an array of interesting museums to explore. The most famous, and surely the most intriguing of these, would be the home of the great Russian author and poet Alexander Pushkin. With its striking white and blue facade, there's no mistaking this museum, as Pushkin's house is probably one of the least Russian-looking buildings in Moscow, and wouldn't look out of place in a fine Georgian street in London. However, this is Moscow, and although the architecture is not classically Russian, the experience really is. Pushkin rented this elegant house in the 19th century and lived here with his new bride, Natalia Goncharova, one of the most talked about beauties in Moscow at the time. Sadly, the marriage didn't end happily. Pushkin discovered his beautiful wife had a lover, and after challenging his competitor to a duel, was fatally wounded in 1837. Nevertheless, the spirit of Pushkin is kept alive within these colourful walls, and the house pays true homage to the life and works of the talented writer. Travelling back towards the River Moskva and leaving Pushkin and the colourful streets of Old Arbat behind will take us to another of the city's most impressive landmarks. And while Pushkin's house is fascinating to explore, the architecture of this building will really take your breath away. Just a few blocks west of the Kremlin stands the stunning white and gold Christ the Saviour Cathedral, outshining everything else around. And the sparkling golden domes that reach high into the sky help to make this the tallest Eastern Orthodox church in the world. This is in fact a very new church, which was built to replace the original, which was destroyed in 1931 by Joseph Stalin. The Soviet dictator had chosen this spot to be the place where a great monument to socialism would be erected. So he blew up the old cathedral to make way for it. Due to the outbreak of war and then lack of funds, the work on the new monument was never started. And finally, in the 1990s, it was decided that the cathedral should be rebuilt. As we can see, the designers and builders worked extremely hard to create this truly astonishing building, which has succeeded in outshining the original by far. Architecture such as this is unlike anything else you'll find around the world. And if you're a fan of intriguing buildings and lavish design, then Moscow is a must, and Christ the Saviour Cathedral really does prove this point perfectly. Although the cathedral is perhaps one of the most beautiful buildings in this area of the city, there's one monument along the river competing for attention, which you'll find almost impossible to miss. This towering homage to Peter the Great utterly dominates the skyline, and at nearly 100 metres, this immense piece of art is one of the tallest statues in the world. It was created by the controversial artist Zurab Tsereteli in 1997 to commemorate the 300th anniversary of the Russian Navy. However, the attitude of Muscovites to the statue is far from favourable, and some have gone to the most extraordinary extremes to remove the colossal bronze ship and Tsar from the cityscape, even attempting to blow it up. As well as complaints about the sheer size of the statue competing with the other buildings along the river, many are critical of its presence in a city which Peter the Great, the founder of St. Petersburg, was famed to hate. If you'd rather visit something a little closer to the hearts of the Muscovites, it's worth heading off to Moscow's best museums to uncover some of the city's hidden gems. One of the finest museums in the city is without doubt the Pushkin Museum of Fine Art, which can be found just opposite the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour on Volkhonka Street. Originally founded at the end of the 19th century, there really is no missing the museum's beautiful pillars and sweeping driveway. What is housed inside is just as unforgettable. The Pushkin Museum is home to Moscow's largest collection of European art, and was the idea of Professor Ivan Zvetaev, who persuaded the young millionaire Yuri Maltsov and the talented architect Roman Klein of the urgent need to give Moscow a world-class art museum. Zvetaev must have been a persuasive man, as by 1898 plans for a lavish art museum were underway, and the combined efforts of Maltsov and Klein succeeded in creating this fabulous building, which was finally completed 14 years later. If you step inside, you can explore an array of delights from Roman, Greek and Byzantine antiquities to Gothic and Renaissance works, and a whole host of other masterpieces by world-famous artists such as Rembrandt and Van Gogh, among many others. You may, however, be a well-seasoned traveller who's seen a great deal of worldly masterpieces, and if this is the case, you might prefer to enjoy some more of Moscow's outdoor pleasures. Somewhere that displays this perfectly is the world-famous Gorky Park. This extraordinary area was originally opened in 1928, and it brought together two existing open spaces in order to create a huge 300-acre site that sits right on the banks of the Moskva. The two parks that melded to create Gorky were the Golitsyn Gardens and a later 19th century pleasure park. Because of the two very different types of park that went into making Gorky, it meant that it had the best of both worlds: entertainment and rides for the children, and wooded walks and floral borders for the adults. It's a wonderful place to spend a few hours of your time while in Moscow, from the impressive entrance gates to the original Buran spacecraft, Gorky Park has something for everyone, and even in the bitterly cold winter months provides a pleasant space inside the city for the public to enjoy. Many people have preconceptions of what they think Moscow is going to be like, but as you must have found on this fascinating tour of the city, one of the wonderful things about the Russian capital is that it's quite impossible to sum up in a few words. As this intriguing adventure nears its end, wandering along the River Moskva will give you the chance to take in your final views of this spellbinding city. From these banks, you can catch a last glimpse of unforgettable sights such as the Kremlin, Christ the Saviour Church, and Gorky Park. Taking a stroll along the river is a truly wonderful way to finish this fabulous journey through Russia's magnificent capital. This is the one true city in the world which is sure to leave you speechless, for its history, architecture and atmosphere blend together to make it a place unlike any other. Over the years, it has totally reinvented itself, and the mark that history has made on its streets and squares is undeniable. From an empire of tsars to a city hidden behind the Iron Curtain, a unique and extraordinary capital has been created, full of breathtaking wonders just waiting to be discovered. And today, with its each and every delight revealed for the world to see, Moscow is undeniably one of the most captivating destinations in Europe. Every major city in Europe offers its own unique history and heritage, and an array of cultural delights guaranteed to draw holidaymakers from across the globe. But for those looking for fine architecture, a world-renowned art scene, and a musical heritage beyond compare, all gathered together in one stunning location, a place that really should be at the top of anybody's wish list is the wonderful city of Vienna. Here you can wander in the footsteps of emperors and empresses and explore the cobbled streets and magnificent palaces of a city which was once the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. From breathtaking cathedrals and exquisite statues to a host of treasures hidden amongst its meandering streets, this city is bursting with elegance and beauty, and it's easy to see why it once drew artists, scholars and musicians from all over Europe, inspiring the likes of Mozart and Strauss to compose some of their greatest musical masterpieces. Vienna is literally glittering with beautiful sights, and this portrait of a city will give you just a taste of the rich history and culture on offer here. By the time we've finished our journey, you'll be left in no doubt as to why Vienna was once regarded the cultural capital of the continent. Although Vienna is today a thriving modern capital with a burgeoning population of almost 2 million, its beginnings were rather more humble. Back in 500 BC, it was nothing more than a small Celtic settlement huddled on the edge of the river Danube. Over the centuries, the Romans and Byzantines would contribute to the growth of the settlement, but it wasn't until the 13th century, when the first of the Habsburg dynasties began their reign, that the city really took shape. As wealth and prosperity flowed in, Vienna was soon transformed into the magnificent capital of the Holy Roman Empire and of Austria itself. Today, the city is filled with cultural buildings and imperial monuments, reminding us of Vienna's glory days. And where better to begin our journey through the city than at the Hofburg Imperial Palace, which was once the very seat of the Habsburg Empire. This sprawling complex began its days as a medieval castle, but after 600 years of Habsburg rule and constant expansion and improvements, it now covers a vast area, which includes 18 courtyards, 19 wings, and well over 2,000 rooms. Most people start their exploration of this fascinating collection of buildings from the Michael Wing, which faces the centre of Vienna and dates back to the 19th century. Its curved facade, crowned by stunning domed roofs, create a fitting entrance for an area which has housed the most powerful people in Austria since the 13th century. The square and streets outside, meanwhile, are rich with splendid architecture, statues and fountains, and still resonate with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, just as they would have many centuries ago. The Hofburg is very much more than a palace, however, and if, on entering, you resist the temptation to pause for too long in the various squares, you'll find two impressive structures to the southwest of this imperial area, which have become an important part of Viennese culture. Following the enlargement of Vienna after the demolition of its city walls in the 1860s, the Hofburg had its last great expansion, and this included the construction of twin museums, which were to serve as flanks to a museum forum. Although this imperial forum was never completed, the museums of art history and natural history house an array of delights gathered by the Habsburgs over the centuries. The Kunsthistorische Museum is, in fact, the fourth largest art gallery in the world. Inside, you'll find a wonderful collection of artwork, including masterpieces by Bruegel and Vermeer. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the square, Vienna's Natural History Museum offers an exciting array of rare fossils, dinosaurs, and prehistoric art. For those in search of something rather more contemporary, you'll be pleased to discover that one of the largest cultural areas in the world, Vienna's Museum Quartier, lies a stone's throw away from the twin museums. You could literally spend days in this 60,000 square metre district, which includes modern art museums, centres for dance, music halls, and wonderful spaces for open-air events. Every single museum has something unique to offer, so the best advice has to be to follow your own personal taste and give yourself as much time as possible to make the most of the area. But now it's time to have a break from perusing through museums and artwork and go in search of the much older inner city of Vienna, and you'll soon find out that the architecture here is just as breathtaking as the paintings hung in the city's galleries. The truly beautiful Stephansdom, or St. Stephen's Cathedral, is regarded as the soul of the city by the locals. And when you wander around the outside of this stunning building, it's easy to see why. The incredible mosaic roof is made up of 250,000 separate glazed tiles, which were restored after a fire tore through the building during the Second World War. The cathedral has in fact become a symbol of endurance throughout the ages, having experienced the ravages of various invaders ever since the 9th century, when it's thought that the first church stood here. St. Stephen's Cathedral has been embellished constantly over the years, and everywhere you look there are yet more wonderful details to see, from the fine stonework to the sculptured reliefs. And if you have the energy to climb the 246 steps to the observation platform, you'll be rewarded with a breathtaking view of the roof and the capital city far below. After the splendour of Stephansdom, a quiet stroll down the narrow lanes to the street of Domgasse will bring you to a much more modest part of the city. And at number 5, you'll come upon the rather unassuming yet culturally important Figaro House. The name of this house may have already given you a clue as to who originally resided here between 1784 and 87. If you haven't already guessed, we have of course found a Viennese location, which is significant because of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Mozart is probably the most well-known composer of classical music from all time. And in the 18th century, the theatres and opera houses of Europe were filled with his elegant symphonies and passionate operas. Although brought up in Salzburg as a child prodigy, he was adored by the Habsburgs and was frequently called upon to play for the Empress Maria Theresa and her entourage. Not surprisingly, as a young man, Mozart moved to Vienna, and within the very walls of this house he spent the happiest days of his life and wrote some of his most beautiful music, including, of course, The Marriage of Figaro. Soaking in the atmosphere around the Figaro house is fascinating, and if you have the time, you'll find that the first floor has now been turned into a delightful museum, where you'll discover Mozart's own story is as captivating as the music he wrote. Don't linger here too long, however, as there are still many more Viennese landmarks to be seen, and a few minutes' walk from Mozart's Figaro house will take you to the Hohe Markt, where you'll find another important symbol of this lovely city. The magnificent anchor clock was designed in 1911 by the much-loved artist Franz von Matsch and forms part of a bridge between the two parts of the Anchor Insurance Company. During the course of the day, 12 important historical figures move across the clock face, and their fine metalwork and vibrant colours make this a particularly unique piece of work. If you'd like to delve a little deeper into the history of the city, wander on a little further north of the Hohe Markt, where you'll find yourself in the narrow streets of Vienna's old Jewish district. Here, along the tangle of cobbled lanes, you get an evocative sense of Vienna's past, especially if you stumble into the tiny Ruprecht Square. Tucked away behind the bars and restaurants stands Vienna's oldest surviving church, named after the patron saint of salt merchants, St. Rupert. Ruprecht's sculpture dates back to the 11th century, and at the foot of its stone tower you can see the saint himself holding a tub of salt, which would have been a much treasured commodity in the Middle Ages. Outside the enclosed square, the cobbled streets are filled with reminders of a once bustling Jewish ghetto. And at the heart of the district lies the main square Judenplatz, which stands testament to the resilience of the Austrian Jews throughout the ages. The Holocaust Memorial is located here and is a unique monument commemorating the Austrian Jews killed during World War II. carved with stylized library shelves, this memorial represents the scholarly tradition of the Jews, and it certainly serves as a poignant reminder of one of the sadder episodes in Viennese history. It's impossible to go far in Vienna without the legacy of World War II being evident, and a short walk from Judenplatz will take you to the city's old town hall, which now houses a museum dedicated to the Austrian resistance. The archives held here give a fascinating insight into the Austrian struggle during the war, and the building itself, with its combination of medieval and Baroque architecture, boasts some truly impressive features. We've now reached the halfway point in our journey, but there's still a great deal more to be seen in Vienna, and for the next chapter in our adventure through the Austrian capital, it's time to step back to an age when the Habsburg Empire was truly flourishing, as we venture into some of Vienna's most elegant buildings. We've only just begun to touch on the wonders of this extraordinary city, and if you take a trip to the outskirts of the capital, you'll be greeted with one of the most important cultural monuments in Austria. It's been said that the beauty of the Schönbrunn Palace surpasses that of the Palace of Versailles in Paris, and this much-loved summer residence of the Habsburgs, dating back to the 16th century, has a great many tales to tell. Empress Maria Theresa spent the summers here in the 18th century, with her huge royal entourage numbering over 1,500 people. Not to mention her husband, Francis I, 5 sons and 11 daughters, the youngest of which went on to become the most notorious and last ever Queen of France, Marie Antoinette. As you enter the palace, you'll certainly get a taste of the extravagance enjoyed by the imperial family, and your eyes will be drawn heavenwards to the most stunning of Italian frescoes, which is only the beginning of a truly mesmerizing journey through Vienna's regal past. The palace has 1,441 rooms and halls, and perhaps one of the most breathtaking of all is the Great Gallery, which is one of the most lavishly decorated dining halls you could possibly imagine. Its walls are adorned with beautiful white and gold stucco decoration and elegant crystal mirrors, while glittering chandeliers hang from its richly painted ceiling, making this one of the most magnificent Rococo interiors in existence. Each room holds its own special story, and if you venture into the nearby Rosa rooms, named after Joseph Rosa, the landscape artist who decorated them, you'll discover that this is where 6-year-old Mozart sat at the piano to play for Empress Maria Theresa for the very first time. If you can possibly draw yourself away from the sumptuous halls and chambers, you'll find the gardens surrounding the palace are just as splendid as the sights on the interior. Every pathway leads to a new location, and from the fabulous mock Roman ruin to a 19th century palm house full of exotic plants, there are a host of treasures to be discovered here. You'll certainly need at least a day to enjoy Schönbrunn Palace and its gardens, but sadly, with so many more sights to see, it's now time to head back into the heart of the city, where we'll discover that despite the affluence of Austria's emperors and empresses, Vienna has had to battle through some difficult times down through the ages. Crowded and densely built, many centuries ago, the city's inhabitants were a prime target for disease, and in the Great Plague of 1679, around 30,000 people lost their lives. Throughout Vienna, you'll find many plague columns, like this one, outside the beautiful Maria True Kirche in Josefstadt, which are a permanent memorial to all those who died and a fascinating part of Vienna's history. When plague struck the population again in 1713, the emperor of the day, Charles VI, vowed to build a church if Vienna was spared from another epidemic. True to his word, when the city recovered, he began work on a spectacular church dedicated to the patron saint and protector against the plague, Saint Borromeo. St. Charles Church, or Karlskirche, named after the emperor, is without doubt the most magnificent Baroque church in Vienna. It was built by the architect responsible for the Schönbrunn Palace, Fischer von Erlach. Borrowing architectural inspiration from Greece, Rome and the Orient, Erlach created a truly eclectic masterpiece, and although he died before completing the church, it was finally finished by his son in 1737. The spiralling friezes that wrap ribbon-like around the two towers feature events from the life of Saint Borromeo. And if you look to the top of the main entrance, you'll see Lorenzo Mattielli's wonderful statue of the saint himself. It took 21 years to build the church. Unfortunately, once Saint Borromeo had taken his place as protector of the city, Vienna was never to suffer from the plague again. The bustling modern-day Vienna is a far cry from the tragedies that befell the population in years gone by. Just 5 minutes to the west of Karlsplatz and Karlskirche, you'll find yourself in an area which is buzzing with energy. The Nachtmarkt is Vienna's busiest market, and with an array of shops and stalls to explore, visitors to the city will find it a fascinating experience. All manner of produce is on sale, and for anyone in search of souvenirs to take home, it's definitely the perfect destination. As dusk falls over the city, and the Viennese gather in bars and restaurants to wind down after a busy day, for the city traveller, this is the perfect opportunity to see some of the sights that really come to life as night draws in. Vienna sparkles with beauty as buildings are lit up for onlookers to admire, and you'll be dazzled by the impressive architecture towering over the city streets. To the west of Vienna, the intricately carved towers of the new City Hall reach into the sky to create a truly memorable sight, rivaling any other modern government building in Europe. Meanwhile, opposite, the beautiful semicircular facade of the Burgtheater is just as splendid, and with its fine frescoes and statues, there are few buildings that can rival its opulence. Vienna is certainly the place to be if you enjoy theatre and music, and if you prefer a night of opera rather than a play at the Burgtheater, there's a wonderful 19th century opera house to the south of the city. Should you be in the mood for good old-fashioned fun rather than a night of high culture, however, then Prater Park is definitely the place to go. On the outskirts of the city, you'll find one of the best equipped amusement parks in Europe, filled with sideshows, shooting galleries and merry-go-rounds, and the giant Ferris wheel has been providing visitors with amazing views of Vienna since 1897. The Ferris wheel has come to symbolise the city of Vienna for many people, but there's another Viennese character who we have yet to make the acquaintance of, who's perhaps an even greater symbol of the Austrian capital. The gentleman in question is none other than Johann Strauss, the man responsible for the beautiful Blue Danube Waltz, who, unlike Mozart, was actually born in Vienna, and a visit to Stadtpark will bring you into the presence of the man himself, or rather, a delightful bronze statue to be more precise. Framed by a marble relief, this was unveiled in 1921 and has proved to be one of the most photographed sights in all of Vienna ever since. It does of course help that Strauss's statue is located in such a beautiful park. And if you have the time to explore, this really is a wonderful place to unwind. As our time exploring Vienna is drawing to a close, there's every possibility that the best has been left until last. Situated at the southeastern end of the city, you'll find the stunning palaces and gardens of the Belvedere. Originally built as a summer residence for Prince Eugene of Savoy, one of the greatest generals ever to serve the Habsburgs. It will of course come as no surprise that such an important man was rewarded with the comforts of a glorious summer residence, and with many grand rooms and extensive gardens. The palaces, the Upper Belvedere and the Lower Belvedere, are together considered to be one of the world's finest Baroque landmarks. The palace's beautifully decorated rooms are filled with unimaginable delights, and in the Upper Belvedere, even the reception area is wonderful to see, complete with 4 Herculean figures bowing beneath the splendour of a ceiling positively alive with friezes and stucco. Climbing the ceremonial staircase adorned in rich stucco work will bring you to the upper floor, which houses an array of elaborately decorated rooms, not to mention the greatest treasures of all, a selection of paintings by Gustav Klimt, one of Austria's best-loved artists. The Kiss is without doubt Klimt's most famous painting, and arguably one of the most romantic pictures of all time. And gazing at the lovers on the canvas, embellished with burnished, multi-coloured geometric shapes and swirls, it's easy to understand why. The world's largest collection of art by Klimt is housed within the grand rooms of the Upper Belvedere, as well as a remarkable selection of masterpieces by many other notable artists. There are still more stunning sights to be seen in the Lower Palace, and although you won't find the splendid artwork of the Upper Belvedere here, it really has some fabulous rooms to explore, providing a fascinating insight into Baroque interior design. From the statues of the Marble Hall to the mirrored walls of the Golden Room, the sights are magnificent, and a true testament to the tireless work that's gone into conserving these palaces, making them such an important landmark in this unforgettable city. Sadly, this brings us to the end of our magical journey through Vienna, and after wandering through magnificent palaces and gardens, retracing the steps of world-famous composers, and exploring the vast array of wonderful buildings, museums and monuments here, Austria's capital will have undoubtedly cast its captivating spell around you, ensuring that you'll be tempted to return another day. We have, of course, only seen just a brief glimpse of the fabulous treasures to be found in Vienna. And with so much more to be explored, the one thing you can be absolutely certain of is the fact that you will never be disappointed or ever tire of visiting this truly remarkable city. Many great cities of the world are known for their style and glamour, others for their history or culture. But there's only one that truly possesses all of these qualities and much, much more besides. We are, of course, talking about Paris, the romantic city of light. And even on a short break, you'll be guaranteed an unforgettable experience when exploring this magnificent European capital. Every edifice, statue and square has a fascinating tale to tell. And from the turmoil of war and revolution to Paris's proud imperial days, we'll have the opportunity to explore some of the locations linked to its extraordinary past. But whether you're interested in art and architecture, browsing through shops, or enjoying some of the culinary delights on offer in one of the many Parisian street cafes, you'll find the charm and elegance of this city is quite unique. From beautiful boulevards and parks to museums of world renown, this portrait of a city will take us on a captivating journey through one of the most cultural capitals on the globe. Our tour of Paris starts in a district known as the Île de la Cité, which is where the origins of the city began over 2,000 years ago. This area was once inhabited by Celtic tribes, but is today occupied by one of Paris's most impressive landmarks, the huge Gothic splendour of the Notre Dame. Where this magnificent cathedral stands is not only the true geographical heart of the city, but the whole of France. And even at first glance, you can see why Notre Dame was the obvious choice for this national distinction. The bronze star set in the pavement on the Place du Parvis Notre Dame marks point zero, where all distances are measured from Paris to every other French destination, making this a fitting place to start our journey. Looking upwards from point zero, directly opposite the main entrance to Notre Dame, you get a real sense of the grandeur and significance of this cathedral, as the two towers of the west front lead your eyes heavenwards. The first stone was placed by Pope Alexander III in 1170, and during the 200 years that followed, an army of architects and stonemasons carefully shaped a truly spectacular religious building. From the incredible flying buttresses which you'll find at the eastern end of the cathedral, to the legendary gargoyles and the many statues gracing its archways and doorways, Notre Dame is a medieval masterpiece. If you venture inside, you'll find a whole host of treasures, and the stained glass windows are truly breathtaking. The south rose window is 43 feet high and still retains some of its original 13th century glass. Without doubt, Notre Dame is the most famous attraction on the Île de la Cité, but it's also well worth looking out for the building known as the Conciergerie, which occupies the westerly tip of the island. It will take you back in time to a much darker period in the history of Paris. Although today the Conciergerie is an extremely popular tourist attraction, in days gone by, this was one of the city's largest and most notorious prisons, and there's still a torture chamber inside, which you can explore if you're feeling brave enough. Originally, the building was a glorious medieval castle inhabited by the kings of France, until the royal household was moved elsewhere at the end of the 14th century. The Conciergerie became a jail after 1390, however, it was in the 18th century when this prison really came to prominence. During the French Revolution, more than 4,000 prisoners were detained here, and many of them were sent to the guillotine, including Queen Marie Antoinette, who was kept in a tiny cell before being executed in 1793. Paris is rich in tales of revolution, and we'll return to these a little later on. But Now it's time to travel to a slightly more modern location in the French capital. Just 100 metres north of the Conciergerie, you'll find a wonderful example of Paris's cutting-edge style of the present. Built in 1977, the Pompidou Centre is absolutely unique and considered quite a marvel of modern architecture. Situated just a stone's throw from the River Seine, the structure is a centre for the arts, both inside and out, and houses a vast public library, the National Museum of Modern Art, a centre for music and acoustic research, and very much more besides. With an intriguing and visually challenging exoskeleton, those less keen on the design have described it as covered in scaffolding. However, look a little closer, and you'll find that the architects Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano have simply placed all the interior fixtures, such as air ducts, pipes and escalators, on the outside, turning the building literally inside out. Nearby, you'll find the colourful Stravinsky fountain, which is an intriguing sight, even without the water. But as fascinating as all this modernist architecture and sculpture might be, if you're hankering after something a little more traditionally Parisian in style, you don't have to walk very far to see a different side of this beautiful city. Wander along the Rue Quincampoix and you'll immediately be transported back to the elegance of bygone Paris. With beautifully restored original 18th century hotels, cosy cafes to hide away in, and a number of very contemporary art galleries, this is a really wonderful part of Paris in which to unwind and soak up the unmistakably continental atmosphere. Once refreshed in one of the city's many bars or restaurants, you'll be ready to move on to our next location. And if you enjoy art and architecture, you cannot fail to be captivated by this wonderful sight. The most dramatic evidence you'll find of Paris's less than conventional approach to municipal building has to be the magnificent Palace of the Louvre. Originally constructed as a fortress by King Philippe Auguste in 1190 to protect Paris from Viking raids, successive monarchs have since added to the mix to create a stunning array of buildings. But despite the elegant architectural splendour of centuries gone by, for most people, when the Louvre is mentioned, the first thing they will think of is the great glass pyramid that stands at the main entrance to the museum. The iconic structure, designed by I.M. Pei, was completed in 1989 and really brought the museum into the modern age as the new millennium approached. By using glass, the architect's intention was to enable those who come here to still see the historic buildings that surround the pyramid, while flooding light down into an underground reception area. It would certainly appear that he achieved his goal. Today, thousands of visitors flock daily to the Louvre, where some of the world's best loved works of art and sculpture are on display, including the museum's most viewed exhibit, Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of the Mona Lisa. To the west of the Louvre, you'll have the opportunity to soak up a little more of the history and culture of Paris. The beautiful Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel was built between 1806 and 1810 to celebrate the most famous military victories of the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, and provides an impressive addition to the area. Years ago, the Grand Tuileries Palace provided a dramatic backdrop to this triumphal arc. But while wars and revolution tore the French capital apart, the royal residence, which stood as a symbol of the monarchy, suffered many attacks and was finally destroyed by fire in 1871. Now all that remains of the palace are its beautiful 17th century gardens, which stretch out from the Louvre along the River Seine. The Tuileries Gardens are a wonderful space in which to unwind, and in amongst the lawns and hedgerows you'll find a fascinating array of sculptures, from classical figures to more modern designs. As you reach the western end of the Tuileries, you'll find another area which suffered the ravages of revolution, perhaps more than any other place in the city. Place de Concorde was originally laid out as Place Louis XV, complete with a statue of the eponymous monarch in the mid-18th century. It was definitely an opulent sign of the times, when French royalty and the aristocracy lived a decadent life of luxury, while the poor struggled for survival. But all would change as the streets were filled with the spirit of revolution in 1789. The statue of the French king was removed and replaced by the notorious guillotine, and the square quickly became the Place de la Révolution. Over 1,000 people lost their lives here, including Queen Marie Antoinette, King Louis XVI, and many others. It's hard to believe today that this beautiful Parisian square once ran thick with the blood of its own people. But after the revolution, in a spirit of reconciliation, it was renamed once again the Place de la Concorde. But now it's time to leave the past behind for a while and move on to an area which bustles with the energy of modern-day France. And after delving into Paris's turbulent history, a gentle stroll down the Champs-Élysées is certainly to bring some light relief. This elegant, tree-lined avenue is considered to be one of the most beautiful streets in the world. It's also become an extremely exclusive place to see and be seen. To rent a property of any description on the Champs-Élysées will set you back a great deal financially, and only New York's Fifth Avenue would cost you more. After dusk, the boulevard is an even more impressive sight, and while the city is magically lit for the evening, this is the perfect time to explore some more of the city's most iconic monuments. Although we've already seen a great deal of Paris, we've yet to explore some of the city's most famous landmarks. And at the end of the Champs-Élysées, you'll be greeted with a spectacular view of the Arc de Triomphe. The arch commemorates the Napoleonic Wars, which began in 1803. It was on the French Emperor Napoleon's orders that the first stone was laid after his victory at the Battle of Austerlitz. Various friezes depict the 19th century battles, but it's not only the Napoleonic Wars that are remembered here. At the centre of the arch, you'll find the tomb of the unknown soldier, honouring all those who died for France in the First World War. At 6:30 every evening, the flame is lit above the tomb as a mark of respect, and it's said that even during the German occupation of France in the Second World War, the flame continued to burn. The evening is a wonderful time to take in the magnificent buildings and structures of Paris, and to soak up some of the atmosphere of the city. And if you head south, back towards the River Seine, there are plenty of interesting sights to explore. On the left bank of the Seine, the Quai Voltaire is home to some wonderful 18th century houses, and many of the finest antique dealers in Paris. Much loved artists of the past once lived here, including the composer Richard Wagner and novelist Charles Baudelaire. And a stroll along this fascinating street will evoke a true sense of the artistic heritage of cultural Paris. Nearby, you'll find an important landmark, which began its life as a railway station. This is now the Musée d'Orsay, which is filled with the most spectacular collection of paintings by the giants of French art. Here you'll find work by the Impressionist artists, including paintings by Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Edu Manet and Edgar Degas, as well as many more besides. The Musée d'Orsay is, of course, best visited during opening hours, but an important landmark in the city that really comes to life at night is the Eiffel Tower. Situated about a kilometre west of Quai Voltaire, the Eiffel Tower presides over the River Seine and dominates the Parisian skyline. One of the many wonderful aspects of the Eiffel Tower is that no matter how many times you've seen it in books, films or posters, when you actually get to see it in person, it'll still exceed your expectations with its beauty and grace. At over 1,000 feet high, the tower was the tallest building in the entire world, until New York's Empire State Building took that title in 1931. Of course, there are now many taller and grander structures all over the world, but when you remember that this tower was created in 1889, the design concept of its creator, Gustav Eiffel, and the engineering skill required to bring his dream to fruition can only be described as astonishing. Forever a symbol of Paris all over the world, it's incredible to think that a 19th century structure of iron and rivets can still have such a mesmerising effect on the senses, as each new generation discovers the unique experience that is the Eiffel Tower. If visiting by day, it's well worth taking the time to wander through the Parc du Champ de Mars and explore some of the other attractions in the area. At the end of the park, you'll find the École Militaire, which was founded by Louis XV as a military school in 1750. The aim was specifically to help cadet officers from poor families to embark upon a military career. But this idealistic vision didn't last long, and all too soon it was utilised for the training of aristocratic army officers, no doubt adding fuel to the fire of the revolution already smouldering. Even so, the most notable graduate was, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte, and it's interesting to note that this area where the French emperor began his rise to power is also where he eventually ended up being laid to rest. Situated just to the east of the École Militaire is another huge complex that makes up Les Invalides. You can't mistake the buildings, not least because of the stunning gold-covered dome of the church that demands your attention. The Église du Dôme is one of the finest examples of 17th century French architecture, and even on a dull and grey day, its wonderful gilded cupola lights up the sky like a replacement sun. If you have time to explore the inside of the church, you'll find the frescoes that adorn the interior are truly breathtaking, and the artist, Charles de la Fosse's Glory of Paradise, is without doubt the most impressive of all. Below the lavishly decorated cupola lies the tomb of Napoleon, and his remains have been here since December the 14th, 1840, 20 years after he died in exile on the island of St. Helena. There are plenty of fascinating sights in the Église du Dôme, but if you can bear to tear yourself away, it's now time to head away from central Paris to a district just a little further out. Nestled on the very edge of central northern Paris, Montmartre sits on a steep hill that sweeps elegantly down to the metropolis. Immediately obvious is the completely different atmosphere here to the rest of Paris, not least, as you can see for yourself, because the ground isn't sufficiently stable to allow for new building projects. So much of the district's old worldly charm and rather ramshackle architecture has been left undisturbed. In the past, Montmartre became home to young poverty-stricken artists who were drawn to Paris to ply their trade, many of whom went on to become world famous, including the likes of Salvador Dali and Vincent van Gogh. Today, as you stroll through the charming streets and squares, you'll find galleries and museums dedicated to the artists that once painted here. The Dali Museum stands at the very heart of Montmartre, and with no less than 330 original engravings and sculptures by Salvador Dali on display, offers an extraordinary journey through the artist's surreal universe. Not far from the Dali Museum, you'll find the Place du Tertre, a real Parisian high point, famed for its association with the artists who began exhibiting here well over a century ago. Awash with interesting little cafes and creperies, you'll find it full of budding artists, even when the weather's bad, ready and willing to capture your likeness for the right price. They may not be the next grand masters, but what better way to remember your travels than with your very own portrait by a Parisian artist? The artist and rather bohemian atmosphere may well be what attracts so many people to Montmartre. But if you head to the summit of the hill, there's a Parisian sight that if you come here, you can't fail to see. This magnificent basilica is the Sacré-Cœur, dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Christ. The white-domed extravaganza, considered to be one of France's most important Roman Catholic churches, really is a spectacular sight. Work began here in 1875 after two businessmen promised to build the basilica if France was spared from assault during the Franco-Prussian War. And as this is precisely what happened, they were true to their word. As a result of the advantageous location, the Sacré-Cœur can be seen from all over Paris, and from this spot, the entire city is laid out in front of you, giving as good a view of Paris as you'll see from the Eiffel Tower. Sadly, we're now nearing the end of our journey. It's time to head back into central Paris to Les Grands Boulevards, where you'll be greeted with a view of one of the most elegant attractions in the city, the magnificent Opera Garnier. Paris's beautiful opera house was made famous by the novelist Gaston Leroux in The Phantom of the Opera in the early 19th century, and the later musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber. The building itself was erected in 1872 as part of Napoleon III's vision for a second empire. And the opera house, with its coloured stone and gold statues, must surely have been one of the grandest sights in all of France at the time. Looking like something out of a fairy tale, with its ornate stonework and almost crown-like dome on top, the Opera House is as magical today as ever. And just as you would expect from such a lavish building, it's still very much at the heart of Parisian cultural life, with a capacity that can accommodate well over 2,000 people. The elegance of the Opera House has clearly rubbed off on the surrounding area. If you wander around Les Grands Boulevards, you'll find an area of fashionable stores, brasseries and sophisticated street cafes. The area is the epitome of culture and style, as well as being a wonderful example of everything that makes Paris such a delightful and memorable city. As our tour around Paris comes to an end, Le Grand Boulevard provides the perfect conclusion to this cityscape adventure. Paris is a city where on every corner there's a site of some interest. The architecture is second to none, and with a history that's as varied as it is colourful, you'll never be at a loss for either enlightenment or entertainment. Paris has, quite rightly, been dubbed the City of Light, as the brightest jewel sparkling in the crown of modern France. And for those who come here to visit, it truly makes for a mesmerising experience. Every European capital has an array of treasures guaranteed to captivate the intrepid traveller. But when visiting Rome, where an ancient civilization meets cutting-edge style, the breathtaking attractions on offer here truly are beyond compare. Once the capital of the most powerful empire on earth, Rome is one of the most spectacular cities in the world, where the remnants of ancient temples tower above the most exquisite Baroque architecture, while stunning sculptures and frescoes draw your eyes heavenwards. The extraordinary past of this city is still evident in the giant monuments that dominate the skyline, and the wonderful fountains, statues and glorious churches shaped by some of history's most talented artists and architects make it clear that although Rome no longer has an empire, it is without doubt an omnipresent force and still very much at the centre of the Christian world. From magnificent cathedrals and museums to bustling streets and squares, this portrait of a city will reveal the eternal beauty of Rome. You'll soon see for yourselves why everyone who comes here will do all that they can to return, time and again. To begin our journey through Rome, we'll start with the origins of the city, and at its very heart you'll find Palatine Hill, where the earliest traces of civilization can be found. Palatine is one of Rome's 7 hills, and beneath the ruins that clutter the hillside lie the floors of 2 or 3 huts cut out of the rock, and the remains of an ancient burial ground dating back to the Iron Age. It's thought that Palatine is also where the city's founders, the twin sons of Mars, the god of war, were discovered as babies. Legend has it that the 2 boys were suckled by a she-wolf in one of the caves here, and after being found by the shepherd Faustulus when they came of age, the twins, named Romulus and Remus, founded Rome in 753 BC. Romulus became the first king of the city, which took his name, and looking at the ruins around Palatine, you can get an idea of just how grand this kingdom eventually became. Beneath Palatine lies the Imperial Forum, which was once the hub of political, social and commercial life and the very epicentre of the capital. Here gods were worshipped and battles celebrated, politicians plotted, while great emperors spoke to roaring crowds. And where trees and shrubs now grow amongst the crumbled pillars of once magnificent monuments, you can't help but get a sense of how great this ancient empire once was. Even today, you'll certainly get the sensation that this area is still the epicentre of the capital, and if you make your way to the southern end of the Forum, you'll be greeted with a sight that really lets you know that you're at the heart of Rome and indeed all of Italy. Looming large over the traffic, you'll find it hard to miss the grand arches of the structure that the Emperor Vespasian began building in 72 AD, the magnificent Colosseum. Eventually completed in 80 AD, the inauguration of this extraordinary structure was celebrated with 100 days of ceremonies and games. The amphitheatre could hold as many as 70,000 people. Here civilians and emperors alike would gather to enjoy such spectacles as the great gladiator contests and the early Christians being fed to the lions. Vast crowds would pour through the arched entrances and climb the tiers of staircases to reach the various levels of the amphitheatre. While deep below underground passages would house exotic animals from around the empire, and unfortunate slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war would be safely locked away until they were called for in the arena to die for the entertainment of the most bloodthirsty audiences. Today, much of the structure has crumbled into ruins. The Colosseum is still an extraordinary sight and one of the most iconic landmarks in the entire city. Sadly, by the 4th century AD, the great days of amphitheatres, triumphal arches and magnificent temples were coming to an end. And as Eastern Germanic tribes became an ever greater threat, the vast Roman Empire soon crumbled into ruin and the Dark Ages had begun. As Rome was sacked and pillaged by invaders, it would be many years before the city returned to a fraction of its former glory. But before we discover how the city rose once more to prominence from the dust of its ancient past, we'll take a quick look at one more site, which was of great importance to the ancient Romans and still remains politically significant to the city today. On Capitoline Hill, at the northern end of the Forum, the Temple of Jupiter, dating as far back as 512 BC, once stood overlooking the streets and River Tiber far below. The building was a shrine to the most sacred religious ceremonies of the city, and both hill and temple came to symbolize Rome's authority. Although today what's left of the temple is hidden within the Capitoline museums, which have been since built on this sacred site, the city council still gathers in the Palazzo Senatorio at the head of the square, ensuring this hill remains as significant in the politics of the city as ever. The museums on either side of the Palazzo Senatorio grace a square that has been beautifully decorated with geometric designs by none other than Michelangelo, one of the greatest Italian Renaissance artists. Michelangelo also designed the facades of the buildings, and at the centre of the carefully balanced ensemble stands a statue of Marcus Aurelius astride his horse, a leader who was recognised as being one of the 5 good emperors of Rome. The statue is in fact a copy, but you can find the original inside one of the 2 edifices belonging to the Capitoline Museums, the Palazzo Nuovo. Within Within the building, there are many other extraordinary finds, such as the statue of the dying Gaul, which inspired the great Romantic poet Lord Byron to wax lyrical. On the other side of Campidoglio Square, the other main building, the Palazzo Conservatori, displays an equally impressive collection of sculptures and artwork, not least in the main courtyard, where the head and body parts of a colossus of the Emperor Constantine can be found. If you take the time to search through the secret treasures of the many rooms within, you'll also find an ancient bronze statue of the famous she-wolf suckling Romulus and Remus, as well as glorious paintings by such luminaries as Caravaggio and many more besides. But now it's time to move on and look at a rather different aspect of the city, because after the fall of the Roman Empire, a very different kind of power came into force and took over from the emperors who'd driven Rome to supremacy. Wherever you look, the dominating influence of the church permeates the very fabric of the city and provides an entirely new chapter in the pages of Rome's incredible story. The Dark Ages were pretty grim for the people of Rome, as the beautiful city fell to the destructive mercy of the Goths and other invaders. But Christianity, through what we recognise today as the Catholic Church, was beginning to make its mark. Legend has it that a Sibyl, an ancient fortune teller, prophesied the coming of Christ to the Emperor Augustus on the very site where the often missed church of Santa Maria in Aracoli now stands adjacent to the great Capitoline museums. By the Middle Ages, this church had become the centre of religious life in the city, and over the centuries, as Catholicism became an ever greater force, Rome's worshipful edifices became more impressive than ever. It's impossible to miss the great cupola of St. Peter's Basilica, which dominates the Roman skyline, and proving as spectacular as any of the pillared ruins in the Imperial Forum, it's easy to understand why millions of pilgrims are drawn from every corner of the world every year to wonder at its grandeur. The square in front of St. Peter's is almost as impressive as the basilica itself. Pausing to take in the surroundings before entering the church is a must. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, one of Italy's greatest Baroque sculptors and architects, designed the square, and enveloped in two huge colonnades with rows upon rows of Doric columns, the elliptical space has been hailed a masterpiece of Baroque architecture and is a fitting courtyard for the grand edifice at its head. The facade was designed by Carlo Moderno. Perhaps the most famous element in his grand design is the central window and balcony, from where the Pope delivers his solemn benedictions and seasonal blessings to those gathered below. Having explored the outside of the basilica, you'll definitely want to step inside and see the stunningly beautiful interior. Bernini's magnificent sculptures grace the elaborately decorated naves, and the ethereal light that pours through Michelangelo's cupola is quite breathtaking. We've only just begun to touch on the treasures of the Vatican City, however, and as you'll soon discover, there are a great many more delights to be found within its walls. After taking in the spectacular views of St. Peter's Basilica, a trip to the Vatican museums nearby will reveal some of the most prized and priceless treasures in the world. A myriad of corridors and rooms filled with stunning frescoes and paintings will not disappoint, and from works of art by Caravaggio to a series of rooms decorated by Raphael, not to mention the classical sculptures wherever you look, a day at the Vatican will take you on a truly mesmerizing journey. The jewel in the crown is without doubt the Sistine Chapel, with its beautifully decorated ceiling and frescoes by Michelangelo, and side panels designed by the great Renaissance artists Sandro Botticello and Pietro Perugino. The chapel is one of the greatest masterpieces in Western art, and although Michelangelo himself had to endure painting in the most uncomfortable conditions imaginable, as your gaze is drawn to the ceiling and the amazing images he created, there can be no question that this was the crowning achievement in his life's work. In the Sistine Chapel, it's hard to imagine anything but peace and tranquility. There is actually a Vatican corridor that begins within the walls of the museum, which gave beleaguered popes an escape route when the city was under attack. Past pontiffs would have hurried along the fortified passageway, the Passetto di Borgo, to a place of safety. In 1527, when Charles V of Spain pillaged the city, destroying countless works of art, Pope Clement VII and his entourage fled along the passageway and owed their survival to the fortified castle that provided refuge at the end of the tunnel. Castel Sant'Angelo was actually never intended to be a fortress. It was originally a mausoleum constructed by Hadrian, another of Rome's 5 good emperors, who ruled supreme when the empire was at its most powerful. Down through the ages, the castle has had many different functions. After its days as a fortress, it became a prison, an army barracks, and finally a museum. Today, within the thick walls of the castle, there are many corridors and rooms to be explored and artifacts to enjoy. Opera lovers may be aware that the top of the castle was the setting for the last act in Puccini's Tosca. And from here, you can enjoy a wonderful panoramic view of the city and a last lingering look at the impressive dome of St. Peter's Basilica. With your feet firmly back on the ground, while artists gather on the banks of the River Tiber, you'll find another construction that can be attributed to the vision of the Emperor Hadrian. The Ponte Sant'Angelo, or Sant'Angelo Bridge, was originally built in 134 AD and spans the river connecting the ancient mausoleum to central Rome. This beautifully elegant construction is lined with statues of angels, lovingly shaped by sculptures of the Bernini school. Each one is adorned with instruments from the crucifixion of Christ. The bridge was once a vital route for pilgrims as they travelled to St. Peter's Basilica, and though today many more bridges span the River Tiber, Ponte Sant'Angelo is still a popular crossing and provides a truly picturesque addition to the Roman landscape. Hadrian's enthusiasm for architecture, however, went way beyond bridges and mausoleums, and if you wander into Piazza della Rotonda, a charming square on the other side of the river, you'll discover that one building dominates the space more than any other. We are, of course, talking about the Pantheon. No matter how many times you see it, you will always feel a sense of surprise and wonderment that something so ancient can still be so beautiful. This great domed temple, with all the resonance of the towering monuments that fill the Imperial Forum, was built by Hadrian in 218 AD, to the design of the great Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Ever a fair and just emperor, Hadrian ensured that Agrippa was credited and had a dedication engraved that can still be seen quite clearly on the main facade to this day. Before Hadrian became emperor, a number of architects were scathing about his ideas, mocking the domes he sketched as pumpkin drawings. But Hadrian undoubtedly knew a good idea when he saw one. The daring cupola, which crowns the Pantheon, is nothing short of remarkable, holding the record for being the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. The walls of the building are 19 feet thick to support its weight. And if you step past the giant bronze doors that are almost 2,000 years old, you'll get a spectacular view of the oculus, which is the only source of light for the bright and airy interior. The Pantheon was originally a place of worship, to honour the gods of Olympus. But since the days of the Renaissance, it has been both a tomb and a shrine for the kings of Italy, as well as prominent citizens such as the composer Corelli and the great artist Raphael. Close to the Pantheon, you'll find many glorious sights, such as the beautiful Baroque church Sant'Agnese in Agone, which stands in one of the most popular squares in Rome, Piazza Navona. Here you can take a moment to enjoy the fountains designed by Bernini and soak up the Italian atmosphere. However, if you prefer to take yourself off the main tourist trail and explore some of the narrow alleyways off the beaten track, you may find yourself stumbling upon one of the Italian papacy's most breathtaking creations, the unmistakably glorious Trevi Fountain. Gazing at the beautiful figures sculpted by Nicola Salvi will come as no surprise that the theme of this spectacular fountain is the taming of the waters. At the centre, a colossus of Neptune sits upon a chariot guided by 2 seahorses. On either side, 2 tritons stand, one struggling to master an unruly seahorse, and the other leading a more docile creature, symbolising the contrasting moods of the sea. The tumbling cascades are at times reminiscent of mountain brooks, and if the sight of the Trevi Fountain is enough to make you want to return to Rome, you should follow the old tradition of throwing a coin into its waters, which is supposed to ensure a return trip. But now, let's take a break from history, art and architecture, and as dusk falls over the Italian capital, you'll find quite a different city comes to life. Exploring Rome after dark can be equally as magical as experiencing the city by day in the vibrant Italian sunshine, with fountains and monuments vividly lighting up the night sky. A gentle evening stroll through the squares and winding streets can be a delightful way to do a little sightseeing in slightly calmer surroundings. But there's another side to Rome that we've yet to reveal. If fashion happens to be something that you follow, it's unlikely to come as too much of a surprise. If you venture down Via Condotti, you'll find yourself in one of Rome's most stylish areas, and wandering amongst the Italian shoppers, perusing the designer goods elegantly displayed in the shop windows will be an intriguing experience. Although you'll undoubtedly be tempted, a quick glance at the price tags will generally get you back on the straight and narrow. Wandering through this maze of highly fashionable streets can be every bit as fascinating as exploring Rome's galleries and museums. But if you do decide to pay a visit to Via Condotti by night, do make sure you come back again in daylight, because at its head lies one of Rome's most popular attractions. For centuries, Piazza di Spagna has been a favourite haunt for tourists and expatriates alike, with a charm that is truly unique. At the dawn of the 19th century, the square was at the centre of the city's main hotel district, and many artists, writers and poets passed this way. Some of them even became more permanent residents, and one of the most notable of these was the English Romantic poet John Keats, who stayed at a house on the corner of the Spanish Steps in 1820. joined here by his great friend, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, and the renamed Keats-Shelley Memorial House commemorates the fact that Keats spent the last few months of his life here before dying at the tender age of 25. Keats and Shelley aren't the only English influence in this area, however. If you prefer a change from the espressos and lattes on offer in the typical Italian bars, you can visit the quintessentially English Babington tea rooms that also overlook the square. The star attraction of Piazza di Spagna is, of course, the elegant stairway, which is known as the Spanish Steps. Here, people can pause to rest from the rush of the day, taking time out of their busy schedules to enjoy the morning sun and absorb surroundings rich in style, culture and history. And with a last look at the Spanish Square, one of the liveliest areas in the city, our journey through the winding narrow streets and broad sweeping boulevards of Rome has sadly drawn to a close. Even a lifetime would perhaps not give you enough hours to explore all of the city's delightful treasures. But hopefully, this brief glimpse at the spectacular architecture, ancient monuments and breathtaking museums of the Italian capital will have given you the opportunity to soak up at least a little of the irresistible atmosphere of this truly eternal city.